Dear Senator Coleman and Representative Tong and honorary members of the committee today, thank you for hearing my testimony and staying this late. I know it's a task, and I don't envy you guys on that side because you guys have to do this more than once. So I do appreciate it. I'm here and want to voice my opposition to the 3 gun-related bills on the docket. And I just want to make some points. I already submitted written testimony, and it has a lot of footnotes with references for the facts that I got, and all the facts I got were from the state, either the domestic violence reports or the domestic violence fatality reports. There was a lot of raw data there. I was just able to put it into percentages, but you guys could reference my testimony with that. And then I just want to point out really quickly with the whole the 2938C statute, it also states that you need the testimony of 2 police officers, which I think that in police officers, as we know, are sworn under oath and should hold a higher standard than a civilian ex parte affidavit. Whether that's due process, I don't know, or procedural due process. And I know it's this whole ex parte thing, but I just want to point out that with that gun seizure, with that statute, with that gun seizure statute, it requires the testimony of 2 police officers. So you have 2 non-biased, if you will, even though it's an ex parte, you have 2 non-biased people submitting testimony of why your firearm should be seized in that case. And I also just want to bring up another case that I was very surprised that no one knew about that law, especially the domestic violence advocates. And I just want to make sure, a quick point, there is another law in the books for firearm seizures under family violence. And if as soon as the police officer goes to the family violence, that seemed really quick. But anyways, as soon as they
seem quick, but I think you're doing a good job. But if you can move to the point of summarizing the remainder of your testimony, that would be
okay. We already have 2 gun seizure laws on the books. One's a family violence law statute, which states if they go out for a crime, right there, without even a warrant, a police officer could seize the weapons in that house. And then quickly, I just want to share this bill is going to make victims. You know, they're trying to prevent victims, but on the other hand, it's going to make victims. I'm going to tell you a quick story that happened to me 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I met a woman that I eventually married, but she had 2 children. And when I first met her, she was a victim of domestic violence for years, and so I could attest to firsthand the emotional stress that these relationships have. But when the father of the children was in jail for violating restraining orders, but one of the first things he did when he got out of jail was get an ex parte order against me on behalf of his children. Now, this was a gentleman that I never even met, and I didn't even know what he looked like. But one night, I'm sitting we're sitting at the dinner table, and a marshal shows up and says, "I have an ex parte order, for you, and you have to move out of your house for the next 14 days." Luckily, this firearms bill wasn't in effect because one of the main reasons we had a firearm in the house was for protection from this gentleman. And he said that he made all these false accusations, and he didn't even have supervised. He only had 8 hours a month of supervised visitation with his children, 2 4-hour sessions a month when he first got out of jail. They were going to eventually trickle in more visitation, but that never panned out, and he saw his kids maybe 2 months after the restraining order that he put up against me. But if this law was in effect, this would have jeopardized my family's safety because this gentleman already violated restraining orders. Numerous restraining orders he violated, and he only got 6 months in jail for violating, I think, a total of 3 restraining orders. And this is back when restraining orders were 6 months years ago, not the year that they have now. So I just want to make sure that there's a point here, an aspect that people, this might victimize people and take away their firearms for people that have firearms to protect them from their domestic and abusive spouse. And I don't think the gun is going to make the abuser the abusive. An abuser is abusive because he's an abuser, not because he has a firearm. And I really think if you take a firearm away from the abuser, he could just cross state lines, get another weapon. If he has, and I say he, but if the abuser has the intention of hurting and killing his someone he had domestic relations with at one point, a firearm's not going to prevent that. He's going to do it with a knife. He's going to go cross state lines, go get a firearm from out of state. He's going to pick up any other weapon. And he could cut the brake lines. There's thousands of other ways
Thank
he
you,
could do it.
Mr.
All right. Thank you. Any questions?
Are there questions? Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to keep it short. So the gentleman or the guy who was your ex-spouse's husband, or you mean your girlfriend's husband?
They weren't even married. He was the father of their children.
Okay. And he swore out a temporary restraining order against you?
Yes.
And how about against his girlfriend?
No.
Okay, so just against you. So he was trying to get you out of his common law wife's house.
Actually, they moved into they actually moved into my house as protection because they were so scared when he got out of jail that he was going to find them, and they were really scared. So they actually moved into my house prior to him getting out of jail for the reason of protection, and that had nothing to do with firearms. But they felt safer living with me than in their old house. And then within months of him getting out of jail, he's made these false accusations saying that I was using corporal punishment on his children. His children were fearful of their life, which were not true, getting an ex parte order just by going to the courthouse. And he didn't even see the judge. He just filled out the application, and the clerk brought it back to the judge. So the judge didn't even ask him a question. This is all a 3-page application that a clerk brings to a judge. So it's not even like the applicant necessarily is face-to-face with the judge.
Did you get to see the application?
I did see the application, and I was just amazed. And actually, when the marshal dropped off the application, the marshal actually warned me. He says, "I don't know if you know this guy, but this guy's scary. You need to watch your back." And I never even met this guy. I knew him by name. I didn't even know what he looked like, other than I saw pictures that that the family had, that the children and my ex had of him. But I never even met the guy. Never even saw him face to face.
And did you eventually have a hearing?
I eventually had a hearing. I had to hire a lawyer. I don't know what happened, to be honest with you, because I never went in front of the judge. I hired the lawyer. I was at the courthouse, and they went into a back room between my lawyer and this other party, and it was dropped, and the judge apologized for issuing it because he wasn't aware of the whole facts. That was all through third party, through my lawyer. But I didn't actually see the judge because I didn't know what to do. I was like, this is unbelievable. My firearm, I could lose my firearms over this, and I could lose all my other rights. And the reason we had my firearms was one of the main reasons, actually, that I had firearms before, but the main reason I started carrying my firearm outside of my house was because of this gentleman. And just, he was just he just wasn't stable. He was an abusive guy, and he would come. We don't have no facts, but there was times where he'd come to our house and our phone lines would be cut. Very mysterious things happened. Nothing that we ever had facts or charges. We'd call the cops, but there was no evidence, so we were never to press charges.
And how, if this bill were to pass, 650 were to pass, how would that have affected your situation?
I think it probably wouldn't. Right now, in hindsight, it wouldn't have mattered because he did not do anything. But I know my at the time my wife felt very safe because there was a firearm in the house, and there was we had to put cell phones in each room. We had to put phones in each room because they were worried that he would just come in and take stuff. We actually had to lock firearms in each room, so this way, if he did come into our house, all they had to do was go to a bedroom and lock the door, and there was already a firearm in that room and a phone. But they were very scared. I mean, the children were very scared. There were at the time, the oldest was 7, and I remember the babysitter came and knocked on the door around 8 o'clock, and the 7-year-old was so scared he started crying because he thought it was his father at the door. And it was just the babysitter knocking on the door, but he just saw a shadow, and he thought it was his father, and he started crying and screaming. It was very traumatic, and it's very emotional. A lot of people don't understand, unless you went through it, and I didn't go through it firsthand, but through this, you don't realize the almost imprisonment, the emotional imprisonment some of these victims go through. So I sympathize very much, but I just also want to point out that there's a potential for this bill to take away a firearm from the victim, because the abuser could easily make these false allegations and take away their right to protect themselves. And I think that's a point that needs to be addressed.
Right. Now, you had said that it probably wouldn't do anything, but if this bill were law at the time that you were handed that temporary restraining order, you would no longer be legally in possession of any firearms, and you would have to turn them in within 24 hours, correct?
That is correct. So I would, if this law was in effect, what happened was they would seize my firearms, or I would have to turn somehow, without transporting them, I'd have to find some magical way to get them somewhere. And because I wouldn't be, with this law, as soon as I got served with that warrant, or the ex parte order, I wouldn't be able to transport them. So I'd have to either call the cops, which I don't believe they do that, or I'd have to find some FFL to come to my house, and I'm sure I'd have to pay an extra fee, and they would take my permit. And then once the local police take your permit, which is just pretty much looking like the driver's license, but means you pass the background check, that gets sent up to the state. And I would have to go to the firearms board to get that process back, and it would take years. So by just making a false accusation for a 14-day temporary period, this ultimately would have made us vulnerable for years after that. So it's not just everybody's, it's only temporary. No, we could have been without firearms in our house for years after this, and that's pretty scary. And I don't know. I don't know what, nothing ever did happen, but I don't know what could have happened. And the potential was very high for something to happen. Thank God it never did, but it was there.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Other questions? Mr. Chairman, Tong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for sharing your experience. I think it's instructive. I want to ask you about, you talked about a situation in which a victim may actually lose their gun. And we've talked a lot about various scenarios today in which the law, as far as the advocates are concerned, would be helpful in ways in which it wouldn't. I sort of want to revisit what we're really concerned about. Let's say that somebody who's been abused goes to court, ex parte petition for a temporary restraining order, and the person they're seeking a restraining order against is the father of those children you just discussed. It's a bad guy, a really bad guy, and he's a danger to other people. He hasn't committed a crime that the police can go get probable cause and a warrant against him, but he's clearly a threat to the lives of the mother of his children and his two children, such that they are so afraid that when the doorbell rings by the babysitter, that they think it's their father, and they are at imminent risk of bodily harm at his hand. Let's just say that that's the evidence before the judge. Do we want that guy to have a gun?
No, you don't want that guy to have a gun. No one wants that guy to have a gun.
Let me ask you then. Do you want that guy to have a gun?
Absolutely not. But I want that guy to have a fair hearing and an ex parte affidavit.
Let's say he gets a hearing in 14... I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I sort of want to take these in bite-sized pieces. But let's say he gets his hearing in 14 days. That bad guy, the guy that you had an experience with, does it bother you that he's got to wait 14 days?
Well, no, because I say no, because in that instance, this scenario, there's already that order, the 2938, and then there's also the other order, which if he did have guns, when the police were involved in the other incidents of battery, when they came to the house, they would have seized his guns at that point with no warrant, because the police were involved numerous times in this case. So there might be cases where police aren't involved, but if someone's getting, to the point where they're getting battered, I think at some point there's a police involvement. I'm really worried about the cases, and after an ex parte order is issued, last year there was, I think, 45% weren't granted after a hearing. Now, I don't know statistically how many people didn't show up, how many people didn't get served, but in 2014, 45% of ex parte orders don't result in a full order. That's a very high percentage of people that are getting their firearms wrongfully.
I hear you.
Blah, blah, blah.
I hear you about the stats, but I'm still talking about that bad guy.
Okay.
And I think it's hard to quantify statistically the value of helping one family or the value of helping 10 families, but I think there's value in that.
Okay.
And I think that there's purpose in what we're doing if we're protecting one family or 10 families from one bad guy or woman, to be honest.
I'm sorry. Are you done?
Yeah, no. I'm just asking you to focus on that and whether you want that person to have a firearm.
You know what? You bring up a great point, and if it was to ultimately save the victims, or to make sure there is no fatalities, I think we should ask ourselves if we're willing to take away someone's driver's license based on a ex parte. Are we willing to take away someone's driver's license? Because if they don't have a driver's license, they won't be able to travel to find their victim. Are we willing to take away their cell phones? This way they won't be able to download an app and track where their victims are? Are we willing to do that based on an ex parte, a civilian ex parte affidavit? If we're have to ask ourselves, if we're willing to take away someone's driver's license for up to 2 years, if you say yes to that, then maybe you're able to take away someone's Second Amendment right that's protected under our Constitution. A driver's license is a privilege. It's not protected under the Constitution.
I appreciate...
A Constitution that was enacted in 1965 in Connecticut.
I appreciate your reference to other rights and liberties and other ways in which, you're right, there'd be a way to impair their liberty and somehow stop them from being violent. But I think we're just, right now, this bill, we're talking about guns. We're talking about
we're not talking about abuses.
We're talking about a lethal weapon in the hand of a bad guy and the guy that you encounter. But I appreciate your comments. I just hope that you will consider that, because that seems to be the fact pattern, and we sort of lose sight of that, right? We've had all this discussion about different scenarios and a parade of horribles about how in this situation that might happen, in this situation that might happen, but what we're talking about at the end of the day is somebody comes before a judge and they make a showing. I'm at risk. I might get killed.
Absolutely. And you might not. And
I don't want that guy to have a gun. And I think that's the policy judgment that we're trying to make. Thank you. Thank you.
Do other members have questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi. Thank you for your testimony. I'm sitting here listening, and this risk warrant statute keeps coming up. And my question to you is, how long have you known about that statute?
Since 1999.
Okay.
I find it very odd that the firearms people knew about this for years, and the domestic, yes, I'm sorry. But I also I lived in Southbury, so years ago, so O'Neill was my rep.
Okay. And I asked because we actually have attorneys on this committee that didn't know about it. So I don't understand how it's expected that everyday people would know about it. And that's just the point I wanted to make at this point, because even though we do have that statute on the book, knowledge is power. And the other part of having the knowledge is making it applicable. And you can't apply what you don't know. And in many cases, people that have come forward tonight and spoken, they didn't know about that statute. And even though I'm a newbie, I'm a freshman, and I'm new to this committee, I didn't know about it. And I'm willing to bet you there's several people on this committee that didn't know about it. And like I said, attorneys included, people that represent people and the Constitution and the law. So I just wanted to make that point, because it keeps coming up that, we have this already on the books. But what good is it having it on the books if the people that it's going to benefit don't know about it?
You're absolutely correct.
Okay.
He's not here right now, but I do have to commend, I know he was part of writing that. O'Neill, yes.
Yes.
But it is it's almost fair, because it actually requires someone under oath. The district attorney's under oath, and 2 police officers. It goes not just saying 1 police officer. You need a testimony of 2 police officers, which is really either a third party or third party person that's kind of not biased. They're going to present the facts. Where someone just walks in, and I'm very concerned with the people that go in for ex parte orders that have no history of police reports, that have no history of violence, that are documented history of violence, because I think there's a greater risk for people to make false allegations to get people out of the house or
absolutely. And I acknowledge that happens. I mean,
it's unfortunate.
We had somebody testify earlier that said that, and I totally agree with that it goes both ways. You have people that are legitimately in danger, and you have other people that manipulate the law by all means. And there was one other thing you said, pulling driver's license. That's not going to work, because if I really want to get at you, I will walk to your house. I will get on a bus. I will do whatever I need to do. I will call for a ride. I will pay a cab. I'll call Uber. I mean, I'll get to you. So that is not a valid point in my book. And you're comparing apples to oranges. And not just that. This is a serious, serious situation. You're talking about people that are fearing for their lives, that have children, that they're fearing that their kids are going to be killed. And it's a serious situation.
It is. I've
lived it. And I'm sitting here and I'm listening to everybody. And what I will say is this. Unless you walked a mile as a victim of domestic violence, I think that your testimony should be taken with a grain of salt, because there's nothing like living that life and knowing that fear, like a taste in your mouth. You can say what you want to say. We can all have our opinions and we can have our judgments, but we know there's nothing better than life experience. So I'll leave it at that. Right. And thank you so much for staying. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Representative. And I just want to just make a point. You made a great point that if I take away your driver's license, or if your driver's license gets taken away, you're still going to go out and drive. You're still going to go out. So if you take away someone's firearms, they're going to go out and still find another way to harm that person. It might not be statistically. It might not happen by a firearm. It might happen by a knife or something else. So thank you.
I agree that that's true. But I also agree that if they have that firearm, they will use that firearm. It's a given. It's happened. We have the data and the statistics to support that. So you make a good point, but there's also another side to that. And that's what we have to weigh on this committee. We have to take all these things into consideration. Right. Because at the end of the day, it's about, if it's only one life, it's about saving a life.
Absolutely. And the firearms were most commonly used, but in the last 2 fatality reports that were issued, which go back even a year prior to those data, I personally went through all those 26 victims that were named in there, researching judicial websites for their history and paper articles, and none of them fell under a 14-day temporary restraining order. Now, granted, the 2013 report relied on 2011 data, so it was always like a year lag because they had a year to analyze that. But the 26 names that were named in the fatality reports, none that I could find, and I searched really hard. There were some that happened under restraining orders, permanent restraining orders, and there was even 2 that happened by firearms that the people already had prior felony convictions that shouldn't even had a firearm.
Operative word, some. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Arce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair. I was listening to your testimony, and you did say something that I did discuss with one of my colleagues since earlier, and you're the only one that have come and mentioned something like that. And in other words, if I was listening to you correctly, you were saying that if a person doesn't have a gun, he could hurt you in any other way. It could be a knife, baseball bat, or whatever. So even if a person doesn't own a gun, which I don't like guns, but there are other ways to hurt a person, not just with a gun. Am I correct?
You're correct, yeah.
Okay, so if somebody was out to hurt you, doesn't have a gun, could go inside a house, get a knife or bat or golf club or whatever, and do the same damage to you as well as a gun, right?
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Are there other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Representative Arce. Other members have questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Bevis.
Thank you, and good night.
You too. Vanessa Alward,